Okay, for my nonfiction book review, I chose to do Separate is Never Equal by Duncan Tonatiuh, I think it's pronounced. It's a Sylvia Mendez and her family's fight for desegregation. Um, Tonatiuh is both the author and the illustrator. Some of the reviews that they have about the book that were really good is Tonatiuh masterfully combines text and folk inspired art to add an important piece to the mosaic of U.S. civil rights history. That was by the Kirkus Reviews. And children will understand the importance of the 1947 ruling that desegregated California schools, paving the way for Brown versus Board of Education 7 years later. Um, a picture of Donatello, I believe I have it in here somewhere. No, but I do have the picture of the real Sylvia Mendez. I have a picture of her as a young girl in 1947, as well as in 2011 after receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Those bottom pictures are Sylvia's parents in 1947. And the middle right picture is the Westminster School. And the bottom right is the Hoover Elementary School. Westminster is the white school. And you can see it's really like nice and has landscaping, and it just like is overall looks like a better school. And then the school at the bottom, Hoover, it like is in shambles and it doesn't look as great of a school as Westminster. More about the author, Duncan Tonatiuh. He's from San Miguel, Mexico, but he was born in Mexico City. Uh, Other works that Tonatiuh created are called Dear Primo, Diego Rivera, His World and Ours, and Pancho Rabbit and the Coyote. So the basic storyline of Separate is Never Equal is Sylvia Mendez, her family moves to a new school in California, or a new school district. And so one day her aunt takes her children, her cousins, and Sylvia and her brothers to get registered for school. And when they get there, the front desk lady basically says her cousins can go, but Sylvia and her brothers have to go to the Mexican school. And the reason that her cousins could go, but Sylvia and her brothers couldn't go, is because her cousins were fair-skinned Mexicans with straighter hair and lighter hair, and Sylvia and her brothers were dark-skinned Mexicans with coarser hair. So basically, just visually, they could be seen as Mexican more, and so the school district wanted them to go to the Mexican school, or Hoover School, the school I showed you guys at the beginning of the video. Um, so the aunt takes them back, and she tells Sylvia's dad, and their dad is really devastated, and starts first tries to go to the school himself to fight that that's their right school district. They live really close, and that they don't want to move. But that doesn't work. Then he tries to go to the superintendent. That doesn't work. So he really starts putting in some investigative work into figuring out how he can get his kids to go to the better school, or their true right school. He meets a man named Mr. Marcus, who is a lawyer and who has worked with several other families on desegregation issues. For example, there was one community where they didn't allow Mexicans in public pools, and so he fought that case so that the Mexicans could swim in the pool with all the others. Like, for example, the signs that they were putting up were signs that said no Mexicans and dogs, and basically the Mexicans had to only swim at certain times, like right before the pool was getting clean, or either they didn't get to swim there at all. The reason I chose this book, honestly, is because as an African American myself, I hear a lot about civil rights movements for blacks and what they had to go through, but personally, I haven't really heard a lot about other races. But after reading this book and researching the topic more, I see that Mexican Americans experienced a lot of the same things that African Americans did, and that it really didn't have anything to do with that specific race. It was just, I guess, but I believe Caucasians just wanted everything to be Caucasian driven. Things that I learned, Mexican Americans experienced school segregation and signs saying no Mexicans. I never really knew the extent of what Mexican Americans experienced as far as desegregation and civil rights. Sylvia Mendez's family was a real family that fought segregation in the early to mid 1900s. I hadn't heard of Sylvia's family before, so this was the first. Mr. Mendez, Sylvia's dad, created a group called the Parents Association of Mexican American Children. Their lawyer, David Marcus, was a lawyer who fought for equal rights of Mexican Americans. Citizens were experiencing racism in Westminster, Garden Grove, El Medino, and Santa Ana, which are several different school districts in Orange County. The Garden Grove district superintendent was a racist who described race-driven motives as to why Mexican children were separated. In the book, during the court trial, when the superintendent of Orange County does get on the stand to explain why they feel that Mexicans should be desegregated, or why they should be segregated, is because he said things like they're not as smart, they're not equal to whites, they're dirty, they have lice, their hygiene isn't the same. And so they were just all very real, like, racist remarks that probably were a big lead as to why the judge ruled in the Mendez's family. Also, the judge, Judge Paul McCormick, took almost a year to rule in favor of the Mendez family. After reading the book, I did do some more research into the court case. It happened just a few years before the huge federal Brown versus the Board of Education, where it became illegal across the country for schools to be segregated. So you could definitely say it was one of, like, the first driving points into civil rights and as far as desegregation goes. The illustrations is in like a folktale style, if you can see. I thought it was cool how the illustrations covered like 2 pages, so that it was like a big landscape style. Another thing that I noticed that the author did with the illustrations, when he drew the Mexican children and the white children, he didn't draw them very differently. The biggest change you could see was maybe the shape of the eyes, and of course the color he used to show their skin. But I believe that he did that just as another reminder that we are all created equal. Um, I enjoyed the book because it was a true story. For it to be a nonfiction book, it wasn't very boring. They used a creative storyline. The book starts out with Sylvia crying because children at the Westminster school are making fun of her or saying go back to the Mexican school. And so that's when her aunt and her mom start talking to her like about how much her father and Mr. Marcus had to fight for them to have um, equal rights and to be able to go to that school. So by the time she does go back to school the next day, her head's held up a little higher, and she is more grateful for being at that school and tries to push harder to make friends and show people that she deserves to be there. One second. What else do I need to cover? This book would be appropriate for ages probably about third grade and higher. I say higher because I don't really think it has a limit on it, because even for myself as a ASU student, I was able to learn something from it, and it could be used as a resource for like a paper or anything such as this book review. And I would recommend this book because it was an easy read and very understandable, and it had a lot of facts in it that checked up when you looked into them on the internet. All right, and that is my book review.